"I want a baby," said the Apache woman. She knocked on the lonely cowboy's door. The sun was slowly slipping behind the distant hills of Silver Creek, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. On the edge of town, far from the dusty main street, a small ranch sat quietly, almost hidden among the rolling fields. The wooden fence was old but sturdy, and the house itself looked weathered, yet welcoming in its own lonely way. Inside, Hank, a cowboy in his late 30s, sat in a worn-out chair, polishing the leather of his boots and listening to the soft creak of the floorboards beneath him. The ranch had been his life for years, and though the work was hard, it was predictable. It was the quiet routine he had chosen after losing friends and family to time, distance, and circumstance. Hank had always been a solitary man. He wasn't unfriendly, but the town knew him as someone who preferred the company of his horses to that of people. Some evenings he would sit on the porch, watching the golden light fade across the prairie, talking to no one but the wind. He liked it that way. Life was simple and clear. There were no messy arguments, no complicated relationships, just the honest work of raising livestock and tending to the land. But that evening, the silence was broken by an unusual sound, a knock at the front door. Hank frowned, setting his boot aside. It was late, and visitors rarely came this far out. Curious and a little wary, he stood, straightened his hat, and walked to the door. Peering through the small window, he saw a figure standing in the fading light. It was a young woman, no more than 25, with long dark hair that fell past her shoulders. Her clothing was simple but neat, and her eyes, dark and intense, met his with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. Hank felt a strange pull of curiosity and caution at the same time. He opened the door slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Yes," he asked. "I want a baby," she said without any hesitation. Her voice was steady, almost startling in its directness. Hank blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. The words seemed to hang in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "I what?" he stammered. "I want a baby," she repeated. "I need a safe place to raise one. I don't have anywhere else to go." She didn't waver, didn't apologize. She simply looked at him, waiting for a response. Hank was silent for a long moment, the words echoing in his mind. He had heard many things in his life, but nothing like this. The woman introduced herself as Ayana. She explained that she was from a distant town, part of the Apache community, and that she had grown up without a family she could rely on. Her childhood had been scattered, filled with foster homes and temporary guardians. She spoke with a calm honesty that was both disarming and compelling. Hank, who had spent so many years alone, listening only to the wind and his own thoughts, found himself drawn in by her courage and the raw sincerity in her voice. At first, he didn't know what to say. The proposition was unusual, even in a town like Silver Creek, where life was often simpler than in the bustling cities. Hank had always respected boundaries, and he understood responsibility. He also knew the world was full of people who made promises they couldn't keep. But there was something different about Ayana. She wasn't asking for charity, nor was she trying to manipulate him. She simply wanted a chance to create a family, a chance to experience something she had never known. The air between them was heavy with possibility. Hank thought about his own life, the long days of solitude, the quiet nights under the stars, and the emptiness that sometimes gnawed at him. He had always imagined that he was content being alone, but now, looking at Ayana, he realized that maybe he had been missing something he didn't even know he wanted. Ayana sensed his hesitation and offered a gentle smile. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said softly. "And I don't mean to make things complicated. I need someone who can give a child a safe home. That's all. You don't have to say yes right away. I just had to try." Hank nodded slowly. There was a part of him that wanted to shut the door and return to his quiet life. But another part, a deeper part, felt a spark of curiosity and perhaps even hope. He invited her inside, offering her a chair by the fireplace. The room was modest, with simple furniture and a few mementos from his past, but it was warm and welcoming. They sat in silence for a few minutes, listening to the soft crackle of the fire. Yana seemed unafraid of the quiet, as if she understood that silence could carry meaning just as strongly as words. She told stories of her childhood, of the foster homes and temporary families that never lasted. She spoke of the longing she had felt for a real family, for a sense of belonging, and for the chance to nurture a child in a stable, loving environment. Hank listened intently. He had known loneliness, yes, but he had also built walls around his heart. He had spent years convincing himself that life on the ranch, with only his work and animals for company, was enough. But Ayana's words stirred something inside him, a reminder that human connection, trust, and care were not weaknesses but strengths. As the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness began to settle over the ranch, Hank realized that his life, as quiet and predictable as it was, could change. He didn't have to have all the answers tonight, and he certainly didn't have to make a promise he wasn't ready for. But he could listen. He could offer a space of safety, a place where someone might feel cared for, even if only temporarily. Jana stayed until the stars began to appear, the night wrapping the ranch in a blanket of quiet peace. Before leaving, she thanked him for listening and promised to return the next day. Hank watched her walk down the dusty path, her silhouette small but determined against the darkening sky. That night, he lay awake in bed, thinking about the knock at his door. The unexpected visit had stirred emotions he hadn't felt in years: curiosity, hope, and a flicker of excitement. For the first time in a long while, he wondered what it might feel like to share his life with someone else, to offer care and protection, and to perhaps be part of something larger than himself. Though he didn't know what the future held, one thing was clear: life on the ranch would never be the same again. The next morning, the ranch was quiet as usual. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and gold, and a gentle breeze rustled the tall grass surrounding Hank's home. He moved about his chores mechanically at first, feeding the horses, checking the fences, and preparing the barn, but his mind was elsewhere. Thoughts of Ayana kept surfacing, her words from the night before echoing in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that the simple, steady life he had built might be about to change in ways he hadn't imagined. When Ayana returned, Hank noticed the determination in her steps. She carried herself with confidence, yet there was a vulnerability that tugged at something deep inside him. He greeted her with a nod, unsure how much to say. Her presence was a surprise, and he hadn't expected to feel such a mixture of caution and curiosity. "I thought I'd help with the chores," she said simply, glancing around at the stable. "I know how hard it is to manage all this alone." Hank hesitated but then nodded. "All right, you can start with feeding the horses." His voice was gruff but not unkind. He had spent years doing things on his own, and the idea of sharing his work with someone else felt strange. But watching her move with ease around the animals, he realized she had experience with them. Her hands were sure, gentle, and confident. The morning passed with the rhythm of routine work, yet it felt different. Ayana spoke little, but when she did, it was to ask questions about the ranch, the animals, or Hank's life. Her curiosity was genuine, not intrusive. Hank found himself answering her questions, sharing stories about his past, about life on the ranch, and about the small joys he had found in solitude. There was an ease in talking to her, a sense that she listened not just to his words but to the meaning behind them. After the chores, they sat on the porch, drinking water from tin cups. The sun was high now, warming their shoulders. Hank glanced at Ayana and noticed the intensity in her eyes, the same intensity that had startled him the day before. He wondered what it meant for her to ask for a child, for a home, and for someone she could trust. It was a request so unusual, so bold, yet it carried a weight of honesty he couldn't ignore. "You're serious, aren't you?" he asked quietly. "I am," she said, her voice steady. "I don't want to just ask for something. I want to build a life to create something real. I know it's not simple, and I don't expect you to make a decision today. I just needed to tell you the truth." Hank nodded slowly. He thought about the lives of people in town, how they often avoided responsibility, how promises were easy to make and easy to break. But there was something different about Yana. She wasn't asking for charity or convenience. She was asking for trust, for stability, for a chance to create a family where one had never been. In the following days, they spent more time together. Yana helped with the barn, fed the chickens, and learned the routines of the ranch. She was eager to learn and careful not to overstep. Hank began to notice small things, how she remembered the names of the horses, how she knew when a chicken's egg had gone cold, how she worked silently but efficiently. He began to respect her discipline and her quiet strength. Hank, too, began to open up in small ways. He shared memories of his childhood, the times he had spent riding with his father before he passed, the long hours he had spent alone after losing friends and family. He realized that in telling these stories, he was allowing himself to trust someone for the first time in years. Yana listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that encouraged him to share more. One afternoon, while repairing a fence together, Hank paused and looked at her. "You've been through a lot," he said gently, "and you're strong. I can see that." Yana nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "I've had to be," she admitted. "But it doesn't mean I don't need people. I just never had anyone I could rely on completely." The word struck Hank. He understood loneliness, understood the quiet ache of isolation. And yet in his life, he had convinced himself that he didn't need anyone. Maybe he had been wrong. Perhaps life wasn't meant to be entirely solitary. Perhaps there was space for trust, care, and connection, even if it was frightening to admit. As days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew. Hank began to notice that the chores felt lighter with her help, that the house felt warmer when she was there. Yana, in turn, found herself drawn to Hank's quiet strength, his steady presence, and the gentle way he treated the animals. She saw that he was a man who cared deeply, even if he rarely expressed it. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments of tension, small arguments about how to care for the animals or how to manage the chores. Hank sometimes struggled with letting someone else take the lead, while Yana occasionally felt frustrated by the slow pace of life on the ranch. Yet each disagreement ended in conversation, in understanding, and in compromise. They were learning to navigate each other's worlds, building trust not just through words but through action. One evening, as the sky turned deep purple and stars began to sparkle, Yana sat on the porch and shared more of her story. She spoke of the foster homes, the teachers who had tried to care for her, and the friends she had lost along the way. She talked about the longing she felt to create something lasting, a life where a child could grow up loved and secure. Hank listened, moved by her honesty. He realized that the request she had made at the door, the bold declaration that she wanted a child, was more than a simple desire. It was a hope for connection, for love, and for stability in a world that had not always been kind. "You're brave," he said finally. "I don't know what this all means yet, but you're brave." Yana smiled, a soft, grateful smile. "I've had to be," she said, "and I hope someday I can show that bravery in giving someone else a life filled with care and love." As the night grew quiet, Hank felt a strange sense of anticipation. Life on the ranch had been predictable for so long, but now, with Ayana's presence, there was a sense of possibility. Perhaps he could offer trust, protection, and a home. Perhaps, in doing so, he could also discover a part of himself that had lain dormant for years, a part that longed for connection, family, and shared purpose. The days continued in this rhythm: work, conversation, and quiet moments under the stars. Hank and Ayana began to learn from each other, understanding the delicate balance between independence and trust. She taught him patience in new ways, while he offered guidance and stability she had not known. Together, they were creating a small, fragile world where both of them could feel safe and supported. And yet, the question that had brought Ayanna to his door remained unspoken between them: the future. Hank knew that life could not stay in this state of quiet preparation forever. Decisions had to be made, responsibilities faced, and commitments understood. But for now, they allowed themselves the space to grow closer, to build trust, and to imagine a life that might be possible if they dared to take the next step. Hank realized that life on the ranch had changed. The loneliness he had once embraced now felt heavy, a reminder that humans were meant for connection. And Ayanna, with her quiet determination and gentle honesty, had begun to fill a space in his heart he hadn't realized existed. As the sun rose over the hills the next morning, the world seemed brighter, full of potential. Hank and Ayanna stood side by side, surveying the ranch and the land that stretched endlessly before them. Both knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and fears to overcome. But in that moment they also knew that together, they could face whatever came next. The bond they had begun to form was fragile, yes, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, Hank felt a sense of hope stirring deep within him. A hope that life, though unpredictable, could also bring connection, trust, and perhaps even love. The days grew longer as summer approached, and the ranch was alive with the steady rhythm of work and the gentle warmth of the sun. Hank and Ayanna had fallen into a routine together, though neither called it that. Their mornings began with the horses, their afternoons with the land, and their evenings with quiet conversation or shared meals on the porch. There was comfort in this rhythm, a sense of stability that both of them had been searching for in different ways. Ayanna had begun to learn all the small details of ranch life, the way a horse's ears could tell you its mood, the proper way to mend a fence, and how to tell when the chickens needed extra care. Hank watched her closely, noticing how attentive she was, how patient, and how unafraid she was to ask questions when she didn't understand something. She had a way of learning that made even the smallest task feel significant. It was impossible not to admire her determination. Despite the calm, there were small moments of tension. Hank sometimes found it difficult to adjust to having someone else take part in his daily life. He had spent years being alone, relying only on himself, and it was not easy to share the responsibilities he had carried for so long. He was stubborn, sometimes insisting on doing things his own way, and Ayanna, for all her patience, would occasionally challenge him gently, suggesting better ways to handle a chore or a task. These small disagreements were never angry, they were honest, and they forced both of them to learn compromise. One afternoon, while they were repairing a section of the barn roof, Hank paused and wiped the sweat from his brow. "You know," he said slowly, "I've always done things alone. I'm not used to this. Having someone else around, helping, questioning, it's new for me." Ayanna smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I understand, and I don't want to push too hard. But I think learning from each other, that's how things work, even on a ranch." Hank chuckled softly. "I suppose you're right." There was an ease in her voice, a calm confidence that made the tension slip away. And in that moment, he realized that life on the ranch had already begun to change, and perhaps that change was not a bad thing. As the days went by, they began to share more than chores. Hank found himself telling Ayanna stories of his father, of his childhood summers spent exploring the hills around Silver Creek, and of the few friends he had lost over the years. He spoke of the pride and pain of managing the ranch, the long days and lonely nights, and the quiet contentment that he had once believed was enough. Ayanna listened attentively, never interrupting, always responding with thoughtful questions that encouraged him to speak more. Ayanna, too, began to open up about her own past. She spoke of the foster homes that had been her temporary family, the teachers who had tried to help her, and the loneliness she had carried for most of her life. She explained how she had learned to rely on herself, how she had grown strong in the face of uncertainty, and how she longed for a home of her own, not just for herself, but for the child she dreamed of raising. Hank was struck by her honesty and the quiet strength in her voice. He realized that the request she had made at his door, so bold and unexpected, was not just about a child. It was about trust, about finding a safe place, and about the hope of a family she had never known. It was more than a request. It was a leap of faith. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Hank and Ayanna sat on the porch in comfortable silence. The stars began to appear, one by one, until the entire sky was sprinkled with light. Hank found himself staring at the stars, thinking of how vast the world was, and how unlikely it was that two strangers could find themselves here together in this quiet corner of the world. Ayanna broke the silence softly. Do you ever wonder what it would be like to change your life completely, to take a risk, even if you don't know what comes next? Hank thought for a moment, then nodded. I do, more than I want to admit. I've spent so long alone that I forget what it's like to take a chance. To let someone in. Ayanna turned to him, her eyes reflecting the starlight. I think sometimes we're stronger than we believe, and maybe, just maybe, taking a chance is worth it. He considered her words carefully. There was wisdom in them, a gentle encouragement that he hadn't realized he needed. Hank had always thought of life as a series of routines, of predictable outcomes and steady work. But now, standing on the porch under the endless sky, he realized that life could also be about courage, about hope, and about connection. The next few weeks brought more moments of closeness. They worked side by side in the fields, repaired fences, and tended to the animals together. Hank began to notice small details. The way Ayanna laughed when a horse nudged her unexpectedly, how she carefully carried water to the chickens, and the way her hands moved confidently as she mended a fence. It was in these simple acts that he saw her strength, her care, and her determination. Ayanna, too, noticed the subtle ways Hank had begun to change. He smiled more often, his voice softened, and he started sharing thoughts and stories he had never spoken aloud. He was still cautious, still guarded in some ways, but he was opening up, letting her into a world he had always kept to himself. Yet, despite the growing bond, there were moments of doubt. Hank sometimes worried about the weight of responsibility that Ayanna's request carried. Could he really help her? Could he provide a safe home for a child? And what would it mean for his own life, so long lived in solitude? Ayanna, too, felt fear at times. She worried that she might be asking too much, that the life she dreamed of might be beyond reach. But they faced these fears together, talking honestly, supporting each other, and finding strength in their growing trust. One afternoon, as a summer storm began to gather in the distance, Hank and Ayanna found themselves in the barn, repairing a gate before the rain began. Thunder rumbled softly and the wind carried the scent of wet grass. Hank paused, leaning against the wooden post. You know, he said quietly, I've spent so long thinking that life is about doing things alone, but maybe that's not the whole story. Maybe there's more to it than just survival. Ayanna looked at him, her eyes steady and warm. There is. Life isn't just about surviving, Hank. It's about caring, trusting, and building something real, something that lasts. Her words stayed with him long after the storm passed. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Hank realized that the presence of another person, someone he could trust and respect, had already begun to change him. He felt a sense of hope, fragile but undeniable, that he had not experienced in years. Days turned into weeks and the bond between them grew stronger. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet conversations under the stars. Hank began to see the possibility of a future he had never imagined, a life with connection, trust, and the chance to create a home. Ayanna, too, felt that she had found someone who could offer stability and care, someone who could be part of the life she dreamed of. Yet, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The question that had brought Ayanna to Hank's door, the possibility of a child and a family, remained. It was a step neither of them could take lightly. But for now, they allowed themselves to grow closer, to learn from each other, and to build the trust that would be needed for the challenges ahead. And so, life on the ranch continued, changed but steady. Hank and Ayanna had found in each other a kind of companionship neither had expected. They were learning not only about ranch work and daily chores, but about patience, empathy, and the quiet strength that comes from trust. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Hank stood on the porch watching Ayanna move among the animals, her face glowing in the last light of day. He realized, with a clarity he had not felt before, that life was no longer just about survival or routine. It was about connection, courage, and the hope that together they could build something lasting, a family, a home, and perhaps even love. And in that realization he understood something vital. Life was unpredictable, yes, but it could also be beautiful. And sometimes, the most unexpected knocks on a door could lead to the most extraordinary journeys of all. The days grew shorter as summer slowly gave way to fall, and the ranch was alive with the golden light of late afternoons. Hank and Ayanna had settled into their shared rhythm, their trust and understanding growing steadily. Yet, life outside the ranch had a way of reminding them that change was never simple. It began with whispers in town. People were curious about the quiet cowboy and the young Apache woman who had appeared at his door. Some were supportive, offering kind words or small gestures of help. Others were skeptical, shaking their heads or questioning the practicality of what they were attempting. A few even made careless remarks about what they thought Ayanna wanted and whether Hank could handle it. At first, Hank ignored them. He had lived his life according to his own rules, and he had learned long ago that the opinions of others could not dictate his choices. But Ayanna felt the weight of the judgment more keenly. She had spent much of her life feeling that the world was against her, and the whispers of doubt stirred old fears she had tried to bury. One evening, after a long day tending to the animals, she sat on the porch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the fading light. "They don't understand," she said quietly, almost to herself. "They don't know why I'm doing this or what I hope for." Hank came to sit beside her, his presence calm and steady. "Most people don't understand things they haven't lived," he said, "but their opinions don't matter. What matters is what we do here together. What matters is the life we want to build." Ayanna looked at him and a small, grateful smile appeared. His words were simple, yet they carried reassurance she desperately needed. She realized that with Hank, she didn't have to explain everything to justify herself. He understood in ways the town could not. Still, challenges were inevitable. One afternoon, a neighbor approached Hank while he was mending a fence. "You know," the man began, hesitating, "people are talking. Are you sure this is a good idea? It's unusual raising a child like this." Hank looked at him steadily, his hands firm on the fence post. "I'm not worried about what people think," he said. "I'm worried about doing what's right. That's all that matters to me." The neighbor shrugged and walked away, leaving Hank to his thoughts. The moment reminded him that the world could be critical and unforgiving. Yet, he also understood that criticism was not the same as failure. What mattered was his commitment to Ayanna and the life they were trying to create. Meanwhile, Ayanna faced her own inner challenges. She worried constantly about whether she had made the right choice, whether the child she dreamed of bringing into the world would truly have the stability she hoped to provide. Some nights she would lie awake in the small guest room of Hank's house, staring at the ceiling, wondering if her dream was too bold, too uncertain. Hank noticed her unease and tried to help. He would sit quietly, sometimes holding her hand, sometimes simply listening as she spoke her fears aloud. He never offered empty reassurances, never promised an easy path. Instead, he offered presence, patience, and honesty, a foundation on which trust could grow stronger. Their partnership was tested in another way when a medical issue arose. Yana had gone for a routine checkup, and the doctor mentioned a complication that could affect her ability to have a child. At first, the words were like a thunderclap, heavy and frightening. Yana returned to the ranch with a quiet tension in her movements, her hands trembling slightly as she carried water to the animals. Hank noticed immediately. He didn't ask questions at first, only offered support by quietly helping her with chores, giving her space while remaining close. Later, when they were seated on the porch in the soft light of evening, he gently asked, "Do you want to talk about it?" Yana nodded, her voice soft but steady. "They said there's a chance it could be complicated, that it might not happen easily. I don't know what to think." Hank reached for her hand, his grip firm but comforting. "We'll face it together. Whatever happens, we'll find a way. You're not alone in this." For the first time in weeks, Ayana allowed herself to feel a small measure of relief. Hank's presence, his steady reassurance, reminded her that challenges could be met when people faced them together. It wasn't a solution to the problem, but it was something far more important. A reminder that she had someone she could rely on, someone who would not abandon her dreams or fears. Over the next few weeks, they navigated the uncertainty with patience and care. Yana followed medical advice, attending appointments and keeping a close eye on her health. Hank adjusted his routines on the ranch to ensure she wasn't overexerting herself, taking on more of the physical labor himself. They spoke openly about hopes and fears, about what it would mean to start a family and the responsibilities it would entail. The external pressures from the town also continued. Some neighbors, though still skeptical, offered help with chores or advice. Others lingered with quiet suspicion, their whispers reaching Ayana on particularly vulnerable days. Yet, through it all, Hank remained a steady presence. His quiet confidence and unwavering support became a shield against the doubts and fears that threatened to overwhelm her. One crisp morning, as the first hints of autumn painted the fields in gold, Hank and Ayana found themselves walking along the edge of the pasture. The air was fresh, and the horizon stretched endlessly before them. Ayana paused, her eyes thoughtful, and then spoke. "I've never been sure of much in my life," she said. "But being here with you, I feel like maybe there's a path I can follow, a real one, not just dreams or wishes, but something tangible." Hank nodded. "Life is full of unknowns," he said. "We can't control everything. But we can make choices that matter, and right now, being here together, that's a choice that counts." Yana smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly, "for being here, for helping me believe it's possible." Hank placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll take it one day at a time. That's all any of us can do." The coming weeks tested them in other ways, too. A sudden storm swept through the valley, heavy rain and strong winds threatening the fences and the crops. Hank and Ayana worked tirelessly to protect the animals, reinforcing shelters and securing loose equipment. The physical strain was exhausting, yet it strengthened their bond. They learned to rely on each other in ways that were practical and immediate, realizing that trust was built not only through words but through actions. During quiet moments after the storm passed, as they sat on the porch with steaming cups of tea, Hank reflected on the journey they were taking together. "We've faced a lot in a short time," he said. "People doubting us, fears, storms, but somehow we're still here." Yana nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "It's not easy, but it's real, and it feels worth it even with the challenges." The medical uncertainty, the judgments of the town, and the physical demands of the ranch, all these challenges might have driven them apart if their trust were not strong. But instead, they leaned on each other. Every shared burden, every difficult decision, every long hour spent working together became a thread in the growing tapestry of their partnership. By the end of the season, both Hank and Ayana had learned something profound. Life could be unpredictable and difficult, but it could also be filled with strength, resilience, and hope. Challenges did not have to be obstacles. They could be opportunities to grow closer, to understand each other more deeply, and to prepare for the life they hoped to create together. And though the question of the future, a child, a family, and the unknown, remained, they faced it with courage. They had discovered that the foundation of trust, care, and shared purpose was far stronger than fear, doubt, or uncertainty. As the sun set on another autumn day, casting long shadows across the ranch, Hank and Iana stood side by side, watching the golden light fade. There was still much to be decided, much to plan, and many unknowns ahead. Yet in that quiet moment they shared a sense of calm determination. They knew that together they could face whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but they were no longer alone. And in that realization they found hope, quiet, steadfast, and unshakable. Winter approached slowly, bringing with it a quiet stillness to the ranch. The fields were muted in color, and the animals huddled together for warmth. Hank and Iana had spent months preparing, not just the ranch but themselves, for the life they had hoped to create together. The challenges of the past months, the whispers in town, the storm, and the medical uncertainty had only strengthened their bond. Now, as the season turned colder, the promise of new beginnings grew closer. Iana had been closely following the doctor's advice, taking care of her health, and preparing for the arrival of the child she had longed for. Hank, ever steady, had adjusted his routines to provide her with comfort and support. Every morning, he would bring her warm drinks and help with chores, and every evening they would sit on the porch together, watching the sky darken into a soft, star-filled night. Their conversations were quieter now, more reflective, filled with hope and anticipation rather than uncertainty. One cold December morning, Iana felt a strange mixture of excitement and nervousness. The day felt heavier, as if the world itself had paused to wait with her. Hank noticed her unease immediately and gently took her hand as they walked together to check on the animals. "It's okay to be nervous," he said softly. "We've come a long way. Whatever happens, we face it together." Iana nodded, squeezing his hand. "I know. It feels so real now. The baby, it's really going to happen." Hank smiled, a rare but genuine warmth spreading across his face. "Yes, and it's something worth everything we've done to get here." Over the next few hours, the atmosphere in the ranch shifted. There was a quiet urgency in the air, a sense of life about to enter the world. Hank helped Iana inside the house, making her comfortable and ensuring that she had everything she might need. The fire in the hearth crackled warmly, and the soft hum of the winter wind outside added to the sense of anticipation. When the first contractions began, Hank remained calm, though his heart raced. He guided Iana through the process with care and attentiveness, never leaving her side. He fetched warm blankets, held her hand, and reminded her to breathe. Every instruction from the doctor was followed precisely, and yet it was Hank's unwavering presence that gave Iana the most comfort. She trusted him completely, more than she had ever trusted anyone in her life. Hours passed, filled with quiet determination, patience, and endurance. The night was long, but the room was filled with care, hope, and resilience. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a cry pierced the quiet of the winter night. The baby had arrived. Iana collapsed back onto the pillows, exhausted but overwhelmed with joy. Hank, eyes wide with amazement and tenderness, leaned over to see their child. The baby was small but healthy, its tiny hands curling instinctively, its eyes blinking at the new world around it. Iana smiled through her tears, her heart full of love she had never imagined she could feel. Hank held the child carefully, feeling the weight of new responsibility settle on his shoulders. Yet it was not a burden, it was a gift, a living connection to the hope and trust they had nurtured over the past months. "We did it," he whispered softly, as much to himself as to Iana. "We really did it." As the baby slept in their arms, the quiet of the night was filled with a sense of completeness. The challenges they had faced, the doubts, the storms, the fear of the unknown, had led them to this moment. Life, unpredictable and sometimes harsh, had rewarded them with something far more meaningful than they could have imagined: a family. In the following days, life on the ranch transformed. The once quiet house was now filled with soft cries, laughter, and the gentle coos of a newborn. Hank adjusted to the new rhythms, waking in the night to soothe the baby, feed it, and ensure Ayanna could rest. He discovered an unexpected tenderness in himself, a patience and care that had been dormant for years. He learned the meaning of responsibility in a new way, not as a burden, but as an act of love. Ayanna, though exhausted, thrived in her new role as a mother. She found strength in the support Hank provided, in the routines they shared, and in the quiet moments of joy she experienced watching her child grow day by day. She knew that the home she had longed for was finally real, and it was built not just on bricks and wood, but on trust, care, and shared commitment. As winter deepened, neighbors began to take notice of the changes. Some came with warm meals, others with small gifts for the baby, and a few brought offers of help for the chores on the ranch. The whispers of doubt faded into words of respect and admiration. Hank and Ayanna had not only survived the challenges, they had created a life that was steady, strong, and inspiring. One crisp evening, as snow gently fell outside, Hank and Ayanna sat on the porch with their child nestled between them, wrapped in a soft blanket. The world was quiet, blanketed in white, and the ranch seemed to glow in the soft light of the moon. They held hands, their fingers intertwined, and shared a moment of silent understanding. "We've come so far," Ayanna whispered, her voice full of wonder. "I never thought it would be like this, so real, so full of love." Hank nodded, looking at the baby and then at her. "Life isn't always easy, but moments like this make everything worth it." The baby stirred in his arms, reaching tiny hands toward Ayanna. She laughed softly, brushing a lock of hair from the child's face. "It's amazing," she said. "To think that just a few months ago I was standing at your door, not knowing what would happen next." Hank smiled, a warmth in his eyes that reflected both pride and love. "And now look at us. We've built something real, something that will last." Over the following weeks, they settled into a new routine, balancing ranch life with the care of their child. Each day brought new challenges, new joys, and new lessons. Hank found satisfaction in small accomplishments, like teaching the baby to reach for a toy, or showing Ayanna how to manage the barn while carrying the child. Ayanna found joy in the quiet moments of connection, in the warmth of the fire, and in the sense of belonging that had always eluded her. The baby grew stronger with each passing day, and with that growth came a sense of completeness neither Hank nor Ayanna had expected. Their lives were no longer solitary, no longer defined by routines alone. They were defined by connection, responsibility, and the shared love of a new life. The ranch, once quiet and empty, now echoed with laughter, small cries, and the gentle rhythm of family life. Hank and Ayanna often reflected on how far they had come. They remembered the doubts, the fears, and the struggles that had threatened to pull them apart. And yet, in every moment of difficulty, they had found strength in each other. They had learned that love was not just a feeling, but a series of choices to trust, to care, and to remain committed even when life seemed uncertain. One evening, as the first snow of winter coated the fields in a soft white blanket, they stood together at the edge of the ranch, the baby wrapped warmly in Ayanna's arms. The stars shone bright above them, and the silence of the world was filled only with the soft coos of their child and the gentle rustling of the wind. "This is our life now," Hank said quietly, his eyes scanning the peaceful horizon. "Not perfect, not without work, but ours." "And that's enough." Ayanna smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "It's more than enough," she said softly. "It's everything I've ever wanted." As they stood together, a quiet warmth filled their hearts. The lonely days, the struggles, and the uncertainties were behind them. Ahead lay a future built on trust, love, and the promise of a family. The journey that had begun with a knock on the door had led to something extraordinary, a life filled with hope, connection, and the quiet joy of being together. In that moment, Hank and Ayanna understood the truth that had guided them all along. Life is unpredictable, full of challenges, but also full of possibilities. And sometimes the most unexpected journeys, the ones that begin with courage and faith, lead to the most beautiful destinations. They turned to each other, hands intertwined, hearts full of gratitude and love. Their child, sleeping peacefully between them, was the living proof of their courage, their trust, and their shared commitment. Together, they had built more than a home, they had built a life. And as the snow fell softly around the ranch, Hank, Ayanna, and their child faced the future with hope, strength, and a quiet joy that would carry them through the years to come.